So do you think fencing is moving in the right direction? Or do you think that, do you think the timing change and the refereeing changes have been good for the game of fencing, basically?
What I think is that this statistic shows that fencing simplified, saber fencing has been simplified. The last statistics, the amount of direction changes, that's very interesting. That it halved.
Yeah.
During this period. That's shocking. Like that's not good for fencing, because everybody loves when it's there and back and there and back and great fight. I think the last one is very clear that something really changed. Not in the good way.
Hey guys, it's Cyrus of Chaos. Today I'm going to be talking to you a lot more about the statistics project that I've been doing since 2021 after the Tokyo Olympics. And it's a statistics project about how fencing has changed since then. And I'm going to explain how I came up with this project. So essentially in 2008, I was a relatively new fencer, and I remember watching the team event at the Olympics with my family and a few of my teammates. And if they're watching this video, that was an amazing night, so yeah, I still remember that. But watching Keith Smart make not just one but two incredible comebacks to secure an Olympic medal for all of Team USA was very, very exciting to watch. There were tons of dynamic actions, lots of back and forths, and it was just a really great event. So during the pandemic, I was quarantining with my parents, and we decided to watch the team event together again. As we watched, my mom made some offhand comment along the lines of, "I remember this being less boring in 2008, or something like that. I was like, ooh, that stung a little bit. But as we watched it more, I started to realize that the fencing definitely was not as entertaining as it was in 2008. And so I was thinking maybe it was just because, as an American, I had the additional nostalgia value associated with Americans winning the silver medal, and in such a spectacular way. So after I was done watching the Tokyo event with them, I went back over my trove of 2008 videos, and I realized it was not the nostalgia value. Every single bout was interesting. Every bout was fun to watch, and I definitely don't feel the same way about the fencing today as I did back then. So I thought it would be interesting to try to create a quantifiable, objective way to measure entertainment value during each season to be represented in just like one or two different numbers. So I talked to a few of my old teammates and competitors, and what we came up with was essentially these two things. One, if you have more back and forth actions, that's more fun not only for spectators to watch, but for other fencers to watch. Watching two people just go like this over and over again is not super entertaining. And so essentially we postulated that more back and forth actions would make fencing more interesting, and more of this would make fencing more boring. So I rewatched the Beijing Olympics and the Olympics in Tokyo, looking at those metrics, as well as, just for my own curiosity, how often attacks outside the first zone were successful. So before we get to the actual numbers, let's just talk quickly about some of the terms I'm going to use. So you already saw me doing this. I'm going to call that a grinding action. And that basically means when both fencers decide to attack each other, it doesn't matter whether the end result is attack, counterattack, attack and preparation, simultaneous, one light, a guard clash. I don't care what the end result is. If both people chose to attack, that's a grinding action. So that's the first term. And then the second term is the back and forth ratio. That is essentially the number of times there was a direction change, and then divided by the number of touches. So what I just did, 1, 2, 3, that would be 3 divided by 1, so you get a ratio of 1. I'm sorry, you get a ratio of 3. So with all that out of the way, let's discuss the actual data a little bit. So I watched all the videos from men and women in 2008, 2012, 2016, and 2021. I watched it for all of the matches from the 32 and above because there were a variable number of competitors in each Olympic Games. In order to standardize that number, I wanted to do it like that. So essentially what you have here, you can see that in 2008, the number of grinding actions was about 10%. So essentially only 10% of touches did people actually decide to go like that. And as we're all aware, this is where the referee tends to have to make a decision. And so the more of that, 1, the more boring the fencing is going to be, and 2, the more the referee's going to have to be involved in the match. And so after 2008, going to 2012, 2016, and 2021, the number basically jumped to 40%. So 40% of the time, both fencers are attacking each other. That is very high. Basically, we saw the boring number quadruple. That's not good. And then if you come over here to the back and forth ratio, in 2008, it was a very healthy small number. I'm sorry, it was a very healthy high number. There were 1.66 direction changes per touch, whereas basically as soon as you leave 2008, you get the number halving, and that's not good either. So initially, I was only looking at 2008 and 2021 because that was all I had access to, but I talked to the IOC and was able to get access to the Olympic library where I watched every single one of these bouts myself and input these numbers manually. And once I did that, I saw that it was not purely due to the timing change that this happened. This is in large part because of refereeing. So the refereeing has been more or less consistently the same since 2012, and I'll discuss that more in a minute. But the timing only changed in 2016. So any numbers that changed from 2016 to 21 changed as a direct result of the timing. And if you look across the board here, the numbers are, they're a point or two off, but they're very similar, except for this one. This is the long attack percentage. And essentially that is how often attacks are successful once they leave the first zone, and attack and preparation is no longer a limiting factor. At this point, the big change that's happened is attack and preparation has been replaced with a counterattack, and counterattacking is much, much less powerful now than it was before the timing change. So you see a drastic increase in the attack percentage. So what I'm looking at here is this is a table that shows how often you would expect to see a touch with a certain number of back and forth exchanges when you have an attack percentage of a certain number. So let's look at the 50% one to explain what this means. So essentially what this means is that you would expect a touch to end after one back and forth exchange, or you would expect to have a touch with one back and forth exchange 50% of the time. You'd expect to have a touch with two back and forth exchanges about 25% of the time, 1/4 of the time. So you can see that this number goes down pretty slowly, and by the time you have like a back and forth exchange one every 10,000 touches, which is essentially once a season. So you would see that and you would like think that was pretty amazing. Whereas these days you would have a back and forth exchange of 6 once every 10,000 touches or once a season. And if we go over here to 33%, which is around where it was in 2008, you would expect to see a back and forth exchange of 6 back and forths, about 10% of touches. So those numbers compound on each other very quickly. And you have, in 2008, you had this situation where we would see these amazing displays of tactics and athleticism happening about 10% of the time, whereas now you see it about 0.01% of the time. That's something that we should all be concerned about. And so I really don't like the way that those numbers are trending. So today I want to discuss fencing from the perspective of a video game designer. So I've played a lot of video games and board games in my life, and many of them I've played with the goal of being competitive, either to compete at tournaments or to break world records. And as games are being developed, the devs pay a lot of attention to feedback from the community and to the choices that people are making in the games. And they're constantly balancing these things so that the metagame stays healthy. What that means is that there should be a number of viable strategies in the game. You don't want there to be just one strategy that works effectively, because, like, for example, if a lot of people have played Hearthstone or Magic the Gathering, and what you don't want is for there to be only one or two different archetypes of decks to be successful in tournaments, because then every matchup is just the same thing over and over again. It's just, how well does your deck do against the other two? Another example from, I used to play Super Smash Bros. Very competitively, and in Super Smash Bros. Brawl, Meta Knight was so clearly the best character that if you wanted to be competitive in a tournament, you literally had to play Meta Knight. If you weren't playing Meta Knight, you were not going to win or probably even place well at the tournament. And so these are examples of a very unhealthy metagame. Ideally, you would want many different decks to be played competitively in a card game, many different characters to be selected in a fighting game, and many different options to be selected in a board game. If everyone's constantly looking at the exact same thing and that's the only thing people are doing, it's time to make some sort of balancing change to ensure that the metagame stays healthy. So let's take a quick look at the fencing metagame. Because of the numbers that we just looked at, we can see that the long attack is incredibly strong. And with my most recent data point in Tokyo, it shows that it's successful about 3/4 of the time. We're going to use round numbers just to make it easier to talk about. So essentially, from like a board game perspective or a video game perspective, if you select defense as an option, you're flipping 2 coins. If either one is tails, you lose. That is not an option that anyone would ever take willingly if your goal is to actually win.
And as you said, in 2008, it was a lot harder to attack. And so the attack rate was about 1/3 success. And in 2021, it's about 3/4 success. So I remember back in like 2008, if you were having trouble like with the referee or with the other fencer in the first zone, you could just go back on defense. But now you can't really do that.
That's suicide.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's a problem right there, especially with literally like an option that takes up half of our sport. That's not good. So with offense being significantly stronger than defense, the goal becomes to take the attack in the most consistent way possible and then not miss your attack. And so I would argue that because distance pulls are more consistent than parries and allow for the possibility of the reprise if you're really quick, this is your best bet in modern Sabre. You're not punished for jumping in super deep and then taking over the way that you used to be. And if you jump in super deep and lure the person into missing, you basically get a 2-for-1 that allows you to attack well in most situations, unless the person makes a long attack on you. And for that, you can mix in attack and preparation to kind of balance that out. So if you look at the top fencers in the world in both genders, I think you'll agree that nearly all of them fence in exactly this way. Take the attack with pull and or reprise while doing an occasional attack and preparation, and then once you have the attack, just don't miss. So back when I was fencing, this strategy was viable, but it wasn't the only strategy. There were a lot of different ways that you could fence. And the situation that we have right now would only happen back in the day if both fencers felt that their first zone game and their attack were very strong. What was far more common is that maybe one person felt very strong on defense and one person felt very strong attacking. So they'd end up in a situation where one person is falling short over and over again, basically letting the other person attack them and then saying, like, how well can you deal with my defense as the attacker? Maybe both people felt this way on defense, so you'd have both fencers who didn't want to attack, and they would both be fighting to get a little bit of space on defense, then fall short on purpose to avoid the counterattack and try to lure the other person into attacking them. Maybe one person was very strong on the attack but couldn't actually get the opportunity to attack since the other fencer had such strong control of the first zone. Then their goal would be to try to break that control so that they could wind up on the attack. But there were a ton of different variations, and the point is, because there were so many strategies, each bout had to be approached differently, but now most of the matches are more or less the same.
Fencing has changed a lot since 2008. Do you like the direction that fencing is changing in?
제가 봤을 때는 2016년도까지 했던 그 리우 올림픽 때까지 했던 그 룰하고 지금의 룰하고 비교를 해보자면 사실 지금의 룰은 파라드 니포스테나 이 불이 두 개가 어정쩡하게 들어오면서 조금 투명성이 없어졌다고 봐요. 그래서 오히려 저는 요 16년도까지의 불 타이밍이 조금 더 빨랐던 그 타이밍의 펜싱이 더 이렇게 공정하고 투명하지 않았나 이렇게 생각이 듭니다.
So you liked the short timing better than the wide timing?
네, 그 타이밍이 좋은 이유가
Yes.
사실 불이 쇼트 타이밍에서는 불이 하나 들어오면은 사실 선수로서 인정을 할 수밖에 없거든요. 그런데
So you get the
지금의 룰 같은 경우에는 파라드니 포스트를 하거나 아웃바를 당했거나 이거의 기준이 공정하지 않고 투명하지 않아요.
Yes, that's true. If you could change anything about fencing, the rules or anything, what would you change?
뭐 한 가지 뭐 자그마한 바람이 있다면 그냥 바로 전 룰로 바뀌면 더 재밌을 이렇게 사브라는 종목이 조금 더 사람들이 생각했을 때 투명하고 공정한 사브르의 룰이 아닐까 이렇게 생각이 듭니다.
Yes, I agree. Right now, it's so hard to do defense that the only thing the fencers want to do is attack each other. So it was more interesting before the timing change as well.
맞아요. 왜냐면 사실 이 전 세대 그 짧은 타이밍이었을 때 펜싱이 더 아름다운 기술이 많았고 박진감 넘치는 경기가 많았는데 지금은 무조건 공격만 하려고 하고 디펜스하는 사람은 할 게 없어요.
I completely agree. I think it's made fencing boring and less creative.
네, 저도 그렇게 생각한다고 저는.
So the first data point I want to discuss in more depth is the long attack percentage. If you look at the numbers here, you can see that the attack was in a healthier place, being at about 50% successful for both men and women in 2016, with a significant increase in both genders after that. So why did that number jump up so suddenly? Well, at this point in time, or maybe slightly before this, I don't remember exactly when it happened, but the Russians proposed two major changes to the sport. The first one was to increase the timing by about 50%. So the timing, I'm going to call the one prior to the change in 2017 the short timing, and we're going to call the 2016 and on timing the new timing. So short timing was 120 milliseconds, while new timing is 170 milliseconds. That's the one that we're currently on now. The logic that the Russians gave for increasing the timing was that by making a wider lockout time, parrying would become easier and defense would become stronger. Okay, stronger. This explanation is a bit baffling since it should be pretty immediately obvious to anyone who's fenced before and after the timing change that the attack is far stronger now than it ever has been in the past.
Yeah, with the light, with the shorter timing, it was a bit more advantage for the defender.
Mm-hmm.
You always had the option of counter-attacking, and it was a better option than now. And And that's why everyone was afraid of getting a counterattack. So you'd rather fall short. It was a bit more game to it.
So if this was an attempt to make defense stronger, it objectively didn't work. And if the desired result was to make defense stronger, then it seems that the obvious solution to this is to go in the opposite direction and make the timing shorter. But let's come back to that in a little while. The second major change in my data points that I would like to discuss is between 2008 and 2012, the number of grinding actions in the first zone. This was the period of time when the percentage of grinding actions rose sharply, becoming 4 times as prevalent in men's fencing and twice as prevalent in women's fencing. So why did that happen? Well, during European Championships in 2011, one of the arbitrage members actually told the referees during a meeting before the tournament to stop calling attack in preparation. I have no idea why they chose to call this, but the end result of this decision was that because attack in preparation became impossible, long attack became very strong like that. And in a lot of ways, the tactics of fencing can be compared to a game of rock, paper, scissors. So there are 3, if you're not familiar with this game, there are 3 actions that are selected where each one beats another action, loses to another action, and ties with itself. In fencing, it's the same thing. You have short attack, long attack, and parry/pull, which are tactically very similar to each other, though they're executed slightly different with some nuances, but we're not going to get into that right now. So in this tactical wheel resembling rock, paper, scissors, a parry/pull wins against a short attack. A long attack wins against a parry/pull, and a short attack wins against a long attack. From a game development perspective, in order to keep the first zone metagame healthy, we have to consider how these actions affect each other. So I invite you to consider what would happen to the game of rock, paper, scissors if you suddenly decided that paper no longer beat rock, but instead tied with it. So, I mean, obviously you would assume that there would be a sharp decrease in the selection of paper as an action, and it would also probably be logical to assume that since rock no longer has any weaknesses, it would be selected by both players pretty much every time, resulting in a very boring game where every player did the same thing over and over again. Fencing actions aren't exactly like rock, paper, scissors, in the sense that each action becoming weaker or stronger has a different effect on the metagame, but that's essentially what happens. So let's discuss the scenario that we mentioned before. Suddenly all of our top referees decide short attack will no longer beat long attack. Well, logically we would assume that, just like in the hypothetical rock, paper, scissors example we just gave, that people would stop picking short attack and start picking long attack much more aggressively. They would also probably stop picking parry and pull as much, since this action loses to long attack, which would make it significantly weaker. And what you would have had here is a situation where both fencers attack each other over and over again. As such, we would expect to see the grinding percentage go way up and the back and forth ratio go down. And that's pretty much exactly what happened. So in the future, we're going to refer to this scenario as the rock always wins scenario. Now, let's consider the opposite situation, where instead of long attack being significantly buffed, it's significantly nerfed. So let's think about what would happen when long attack loses now to parry/pull. And this actually used to be the case in 2008. When you would try to make a long attack, it would be incredibly easy for it to be prepped it would be incredibly easy for it to be called attack no. Any arm hitch or any like hard step in your footwork would be called attack no, and the defender would be given quite a bit of leeway in order to be able to make an attack back at them. So let's call this scenario the weak rock scenario. Again, obviously both fencers would probably stop choosing to make long attack and would instead lean more towards parry and pull. But what would happen to the game in that case? Instead of attacking each other over and over again like in the rock always wins scenario, both fencers would try to take right of way much more cautiously in the first zone. Very cognizant of the fact that if they try to attack in the first zone, their attack will most likely fail. So they probably build their game in such a way that they could establish the attack more cautiously, or just give up on the attack in a way that they could safely defend themselves. And if you combine that with a healthy balance between offense and defense outside the first zone, you would probably have something that is very low on grinding actions and also has a pretty high back and forth ratio. In other words, pretty entertaining fencing. And if you look at what we see in 2008, those statistics are reflected in that dataset. So we're basically still recovering from the rock always wins decision made by whoever said that in 2011 to those referees. Attack and preparation has very slowly become more powerful, while long attack has very slowly become weaker. But we're still not even close to the healthy situation of like equal action selection, in my opinion. And this is mainly due to the fact that the long attack in the first zone does not have a strong enough counter option. And the reason for that is that you've probably seen a bunch of situations where you feel like it should be called attack and preparation, but the referee calls attack counterattack, and I don't know, I myself have thought a lot recently, like, I can't believe that wasn't attack and preparation. So essentially, we've now identified two problems with modern fencing, in my opinion. One, the long attack is too strong, and two, the first zone attack and preparation is too weak. So how do we fix these problems? Well, I can think of two ways to fix the long attack problem. In 2004, they changed the timing from it being 360 milliseconds to 120 milliseconds. And I don't have statistics to support this because I wasn't able to access 2004's Olympic video archives, because I'm not actually sure that they exist. But during that period of time, there were still a lot of back and forth actions despite the fact that the timing was very wide. And this is because referees called attack and preparation and counterattack with two lights outside the first zone. So option A would be to allow referees to call two light counterattacks, and option B would be to shorten the timing. So I think that we should be aiming to minimize referee involvement and decision making as much as we possibly can. So for that reason, I think that option A would be a very bad idea. So one, you're trying to train the referees to see something new, and two, you're basically allowing more corruption to seep into a game that already has quite a lot of allegations of referee corruption. I don't know that there actually is any referee corruption, but by giving more power to the referees, that doesn't seem like a very wise thing to do in this current climate. So I would tend to lean very heavily toward option B of reducing the timing. That would both decrease long attack success percentage and the number of points that the referees need to make a decision all around. Not just outside the first zone, but in the first zone as well. When you could have, essentially it would no longer be a mal paré anymore. It would either be a one light mal paré or it would be a parry riposte. And that would be much easier to see. So that would essentially kill two birds with one stone. But how much should we reduce the timing by? Sticking to the logic that the Russians gave us for changing the timing in the first place, I propose that the timing be shortened significantly. So the lockout time was once 120 milliseconds, but if we want defense to be even stronger than it was at that point, then I suggest we shorten it to half of what it was now and 75% of what it was. I think we should shorten it to 90 milliseconds. According to my estimations of different attack percentages, this would bring the percentage of successful attacks outside the first zone down to about 38%, which is a little bit higher than 1/3. And this would make attacking something that has to be done very carefully. Just like in foil, which has a very healthy game right now. And this would give a lot of power back to the defender. It would also create a lot more tactics on the attack instead of just giving free touch to the attacker every single time. So defense would be viable again, and attacking would go from something that's free to something that would have to be earned. That sounds pretty good to me. And then it would probably also have the effect that the Russians wanted in the first place, which is to increase the power of defensive actions. So before we discuss the other problem of the first zone having a weak attacking preparation, we need to discuss another major problem with our sport that I haven't even mentioned yet. That problem is that our written rulebook no longer reflects the conventions of what the referee's calling. Like, at all. It's not even close anymore. And fencing is literally the only sport I can think of where reading the rules would actually result in you coming away with a worse understanding of what's going on in the sport than you would have had if you'd never read them in the first place. And that's pretty impressive considering how confused most spectators are when they're watching saber fencing. To be even more confused by the rules, like that's pretty impressive. Our rules are quite out of date. So as part of this project, I'd actually tasked myself with rewriting the right-of-way rules for Sabre to reflect current conventions. And when I got to the part about attack and preparation in the first zone, I spent almost an hour trying to create a definition that both made logical sense that you could explain to somebody and accurately reflected the conventions that the referees are calling these days. And after creating an insanely messy if-then tree of about like 50 different if-then statements, I realized that I just couldn't do it. I literally could not explain how these things are being called. And I was an international referee and a top US saber fencer, and I could not figure it out. And if I can't do it, what hope does the common person ever have of something like that? So essentially, each referee has their own internal logic that doesn't have to be in any way related to any other referee's internal logic. Well, I like this thing, so I'm going to call it this way. Oh, I like this thing, so I'm going to call it this way instead. You basically have no consistency from person to person, and in order to objectively say whether a call is right or wrong, you basically have to look at a referee's entire volume of work for a whole season to determine one single call. That is not a good way to ensure that people are on the same page, one, and two, to make sure that people are doing a good job. So since referees are under no obligation to even share that internal logic with the fencers, it leaves us in a weird situation where we have to figure out those trends over a long period of time instead of just being able to clearly point to an explanation of what's happening across the board. And if we look again at how video game design works, whenever the devs change something, one, they put it in the changelog. They very rarely make a change and then don't tell you about it unless it's supposed to be an Easter egg or something, but that never happens for major changes. So one, they put it in the changelog, and then two, they make an explanation for why they made that change. Oh, we felt that the attack was too strong, so we reduced the timing to hopefully increase the power of defense and decrease the power of attack. That's a change that makes sense. So, if you want to try to write an explanation for the way that attack and prep is called these days, I invite you to write one down in the comments of this YouTube video. I would love to see what you guys come up with. But ultimately, I decided that instead of trying to define this completely unholy, nightmarish mess that we have currently, we should try to just standardize and fix the problem in a way that makes sense. So, in looking at the rules, I think that our current convention of giving a too light attack outside the first zone would be pretty good, assuming the attack was less powerful. So let's just leave that alone. So to fix the attack and preparation problem, let me propose something wild and crazy. Let's call attack and preparation the way the rules say that we should. FIE technical rule 102.2 defines an attack as when the straightening of the arm with the point or the cutting edge continuously threatens the valid target and precedes the initiation of a lunge. That's it. Essentially, my modern reinterpretation would be, in the event that both fencers attack each other, regardless of foot speed, whosoever extends their arm first, preceding the lunge, in the first zone, should be given an attack in preparation if both fencers finish their attack successfully. That's it. The biggest problem with what's going on these days is that I think we've kind of lost the essence of what saber fencing is. To me, that essence is supposed to be two people moving back and forth while carefully trying to hit each other and avoid getting hit themselves. Instead, we've created a sport that's basically who can sprint the fastest while holding a metal stick. And even when you're attacking, you don't care whether you get hit or not. A lot of the time when I'm attacking, I want the other person to hit me at a time that's best for me to be able to deal with it, so that I can receive that and finish with the counterattack. And I think that's a very viable strategy that a lot of different people use. But in order to simulate conditions present in 2008, where according to my metrics, the statistical values were much more entertaining and where, in my opinion, we had an environment where the saber fencing was more true to its essence, these are my two proposals. 1, let's shorten the lockout timing to 90 milliseconds to make both long defense stronger and minimize referee impact on the game. That sounds great. And then 2, let's redefine attack and preparation to be, in the event that both fencers are attacking in the first zone, whoever extends with their arm first, regardless of the speed of forward motion, wins the attack. We need to change something. And because saber fencing is currently very broken in a lot of different ways and no one else is suggesting anything, let's just try it. Let's try this. Let's try to get everybody on board with calling attack and preparation the same way, a way that's simple and can be objectively determined to be correct or incorrect. That was attack and preparation. That was not. Like, easy. No looking at a referee's whole body of work for a whole season, just, that's right, that's wrong. Because right now we have a situation where in sports you're supposed to, there's always going to be ambiguous situations. But in basketball, nobody's arguing about what a basket is, right? The ball goes through the hoop and it's a basket. But right now, all of our touches are being argued about. We don't know where the hoop is and we don't know who has the ball. So how can we ever possibly know if it goes through the hoop? And it's a miracle that there's any semblance of a sport left. So I strongly recommend that we try to push these changes. I think that we should shorten the timing. I think we should make attack and preparation much simpler and a lot stronger. And so I'm willing to stand behind these ideas, and I'll be making a follow-up series to expand on many of the ideas I brought forth in this video, and to propose short-term changes for how we can fix each of the calls in Sabre that I don't like currently in the interim. And I'm currently working on that stuff. So please let me know what you think about all the stuff that I've talked about, and expect big things coming soon.
So you mentioned that you had a lot of success after the short distance rule change and the timing change. Do you like the changes that fencing has gone through since 2016, or would you want them to go back to the way that they were before?
저는 너무 공격자에게 이렇게 공격자를 너무 좀 우대해주는 룰인 것 같기도 하고.
네.
옛날에는 좀 수비자한테도 뭔가 선택지가 많았는데
네.
요즘은 공격자한테 너무 우대가 많아서
네.
전에 룰이 조금 더 이렇게 막 게임의 랠리도 많고
네.
조금 보는 맛도 있고
네.
하면서도 좀 생각할 이런 길도 많고 그래서 전에 룰이 조금 더 재밌긴 했던 것 같아요.
And last but not least, I'd like to thank my Emerald and Platinum patrons, David Amrani, Jonah Atkinson, Tiffany Miller, Roman Bruce, and Veronica Saran for their very generous contributions to this channel. Any other names you see are gold patrons. Thank you guys so much for the contributions. They really help out a lot and will enable me to make more videos like this. If you have any more ideas for what you want to see next, you can vote on those things on my Patreon page. To help support the channel, you can find links to my Patreon, PayPal, and Venmo accounts in the video information. Thanks guys, see you next time.